folks. This time around, I want to talk to you about one of my most favorite, if not my very favorite, time in American literature, and that is the Harlem Renaissance. I absolutely love the writings from this period, and we're starting off this week by looking at writings from Langston Hughes, who was one of the most important figures. Next week, we'll be looking at the writings of Jean Toomer. When I first read Jean Toomer's book, Cain, in graduate school, I was just absolutely enamored. I thought it was some of the most beautiful writing that I'd ever read in my life. And then in week 14, we'll be looking at works from County Cullen and from Zora Neale Hurston. Just lovely, lovely, wonderful, wonderful work, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So I want to take a moment to introduce you to this period, to explain to you what it's about. And as always, you can follow along with me by going to content and then to course documents and then to introduction to the Harlem Renaissance. So the Harlem Renaissance refers to a blossoming of African American culture. So it's not just about writing, it's about art and music. And the time frame is 1918 to 1937-ish. So it's the most influential movement in African American literary history, for sure. And you want to remember those definitions because that will haunt you on a quiz and probably on the final as well. It's very important to remember that this period extended beyond literature. So it embraced literary, musical, theatrical, and visual arts. And its participants sought to reconceptualize the Negro, their words, apart from white stereotypes that had influenced Black people's relationships to their heritage and to one another. They also sought to break free of Victorian moral values and sort of this shame that they were kind of forced into feeling about aspects of their lives that might, as seen by whites, reinforce racist beliefs. We talked about that double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois mentioned in his writings. And so this very much goes along with that. So I want you to think about Gone with the Wind. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that film. There's been a lot of talk about it here recently, and the fact that it's being removed or has been removed from certain services where it had been offered before. I was very privileged at one point in my life many years ago to work with the actress who portrayed Prissy in Gone with the Wind. Her name was Butterfly McQueen. And if you saw the movie, Prissy played the role of a young slave child who belonged to the character of Scarlett O'Hara, played by Vivien Leigh. And Prissy tells Vivien Leigh that she knows all about birthing babies because Miss Melanie is soon to give birth. And Scarlett may not have access to a doctor since they're in the middle of the Battle of Atlanta. So when it comes time for Miss Mellie to give birth, Prissy has to admit that, as a matter of fact, she doesn't really know anything much about birthing babies after all, and Miss Scarlett slaps her. So all these many years later, my husband and I owned a recording studio in Chattanooga, and Butterfly had come to do a documentary that we were doing the audio for, and we were able to get to know her a little bit and spend a lot of time with her over the course of those few days, eating out with her and having her in our home, etc. And I asked her, what was it like to be a Black actress? What's that experience like for you? And particularly before the Civil Rights Movement, what was that like? And she said, well, you know, the only roles that were available to us were the roles of slaves or domestic servants or, you know, that sort of thing. She said those were the only roles that were out there. And you just had to do the best that you could do. And interestingly enough, her voice in the movie, if you ever saw it, she has this little high voice. That was really her voice. And so even when she was an older lady, she still had that cute little high voice that she would talk with. But, excuse me, she was delightful. And she talked about the fact that in the film, everything is centered around the white characters and around the plantation life, and sort of the lives of the slave characters aren't really touched upon very much. So for example, we don't know if Mammy and Prissy were related. Prissy perhaps could have been Mammy's granddaughter, but we don't really know. We're not told anything about how their lives might have connected to one another. And so that's what is meant by the sort of these white stereotypical ideas, and this idea of shame about parts of your life that would be imposed upon you by these racist beliefs. So the Harlem Renaissance wasn't dominated by a school of thought. It was characterized by a lot of debate. And the movement laid the groundwork for all of the African American literature that came after it. It had a huge impact on subsequent Black literature and consciousness worldwide. So you've got the Harlem District of New York City, this awesomely cool place, imagine it. And you've got all these jazz clubs, and you've got these amazingly talented Black singers and musicians who are performing in the Black jazz clubs. And so the white audiences heard about these incredibly talented entertainers, and they started coming to the jazz clubs to hear them, because these Black musicians felt the music from the depths of their soul. And you'll read about that in Zora Neale Hurston's piece, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. She talks about being in a jazz club with a white friend and how she could feel the music in her soul, and he just kind of heard it, And I've noticed this in my church. And no offense to my church, but because I love the people in my church, but we just kind of go to church and we just kind of sing like this, all proper, But if you go to a predominantly African American church, and the church across the street from my house is predominantly African American, the music is incredible. You are like, good gracious, these people should go on the road. They should, be on TV. This is awesome. And you feel the music. So this was kind of the beginning of a sense of, the races coming together, and it really set the stage for the civil rights movement as well. It laid the groundwork. Before the Harlem Renaissance, all of the publishers who had power were white. And if you were a Black writer and you wanted to be published, you had to imitate white writers. And you had to go along with this idea that of idealized plantation life, or, whatever. But with the Harlem Renaissance, Black writers said, guess what? We're going to establish our own publishing houses. We will publish our own work. We are going to take control of this. So they had this new sense of self-consciousness about their music, about their art, about their culture. They had a pride in who they were that was just shining through their work. And interestingly, later on in the 1960s, before the civil rights movement, you had these incredible African-American stars like Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Temptations and Little Stevie Wonder. These people that were just bigger than life, And Diana Ross, man, she just epitomized glamour and style and fashion and beauty. She was just incredible. And interestingly, these African-American artists could attract thousands of people, white people, many of them, who were buying their music and making them huge international stars. and yet they could not eat in the same restaurant at the same counter with white people. They would go into a city and have white people clamoring for their autographs, and they could not book a room in the hotel where the white people were staying, right? Because of segregation. So the Harlem Renaissance set the stage for this explosion of art, of music. It set the stage for the artists who came after these folks. And it was just critically important. The essence of the period is summed up by critic and teacher Alain Locke in 1926. He declared that through art, quote, Negro life is seizing its first chances for group expression and self-determination. And so Harlem is the center of this awakening. It becomes the center of this spiritual coming of age in which Locke's New Negro, as he called it, transformed social disillusionment into racial pride. So we have all of these incredibly gifted writers that we're going to be able to study, and I'm excited to begin this part of our journey. Thanks so much for listening, guys.